Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Audrey Goff, a Deliverance cult survivor. Audrey, it's good to talk to you and to talk to yet another Deliverance cult survivor. There have been quite a few of these, and it just fascinates me to talk to people who are in this, because I grew up in this world where, even comic books were disallowed. We had this very, very rigid set of rules, and while the other kids are playing sorcerers and goblins and this kind of thing, I wasn't allowed because the demon might get you. And then to find out there's this whole world of adults that are playing hobbits and goblins and all kinds of demonic weirdness. It's really odd to me. And I think I've shared on the podcast, I've got a handbook of a deliverance minister with all the instructions that they go through. And it's like, if you have the hiccups, you have this particular demon. And it really reminds me of like the old Dungeons and Dragons game. You go conquer this demon of the hiccups, and I just drink water for my hiccups, so it's a little bit different in the real world. But anyway, with that, thank you for joining. Maybe you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay. First of all, just thank you so much for inviting me on here. It's an honor to be able to share my story and really give God glory for what he's done, because it's all because of him that my family and I got out. So yeah, I don't know. I homeschool. I have 4 children, and I'm married. My husband and I just celebrated 20 years of marriage, and our marriage is doing great, which is like a miracle considering we were under a pastor who was pretty much trying to drive wedges between us almost the whole time that we were members at his church. So the fact that we came out on the other end stronger is only God that can do that. So, but yeah, I feel like at this point in my journey, looking back at the several years leading up to, and then going into this Deliverance church, and then coming out to where I am now, I really feel like this is just a story of God getting a hold of my heart. And for some reason I had to go into a cult for 5 years to come out, and like I can't explain it, but like that his ways are greater than our ways and higher than our ways, and I don't understand it, but on this side of it I can look back and I can see where he's taken me, and having to do with just knowing his love for me, that was just like, it's like he just wanted to show me how much he loves me, and it's just this amazing feeling that I wouldn't change for anything. So,
you said something right there that nobody has yet said on the podcast, and it is significant. It's a really big deal. The wedges between us, the spousal wedges between the partners. This is a big deal. I have seen, so in the Branham cult, it was the same thing. Pretty much anything that is based off of this deliverance ministry has it. Because if you have a person who is trying to find demons where there aren't any, suddenly, anybody who does anything that makes him uncomfortable, him being the minister, sometimes it's a female minister, but if it makes them slightly uncomfortable, they say, oh, that's a demon. And usually it comes down to personal preferences or opinions, but they're looking for demons under rocks that have no demons. And those rocks often are spouses. So they'll start looking at something the spouse is doing and say, oh, she's possessed. She's got a demon. You need to watch her, brother. You need to keep her in line. In the Branham cults in the years gone by, the women were very, very subordinate, sometimes spanked, etc. I have heard stories of this because the wedge between them, and that wedge gets deeper and deeper and deeper the longer time goes. If whichever spouse, either the male or female, is a little bit stubborn, and they'll say, no, this is not sin, what I'm doing. This is your opinion versus my opinion. If they're stubborn about this, well, that demon gets bigger and bigger. And I have had people in the support groups tell me that the minister had actually drove the wedge so hard that it caused a divorce and a separation. which is very, very painful for people in the Branham religion, because you weren't allowed to remarry after you separated. So they would drive that wedge to separation, and then the two parties are just split. So I sorry to hijack your story, but that's a big deal, and it's never been brought up yet.
Yeah, and just listening to you talk about it, it just reminds me, as I've been listening to some of your videos and some of your shows here, and hearing more about some of the Branham influenced institutions out there and the common things that they did. I feel like the church that I was a part of was just really different in a lot of ways than a lot of the things that you talked about. Like even what you're saying now about the women being subordinate and that being a main focus. In the church that we were at, it was very empowering of women, and to the point where it was almost like it's very hard to parse it out, because it's like it's good in one way, like yes, women are just as valuable as men. So there was that aspect where it's like, oh yeah, all of this time in my Christian upbringing, I've had this kind of subordination kind of attitude, and so in a way it's like it was good, but then it's like it tipped over too far into like, now like women, I don't know, like you might question like what he was really doing with women, because it was driving the men away, how he was like advising us, I guess. And then at one point he had like a text group with just all the women in the church and him, like a group text,
Oh my gosh.
And then, so like all the husbands are just, they're just like in rebellion because they're not submitting really to him, is what the problem was. Like, if you aren't going to submit to him. So like he was teaching the women to not submit to their husbands necessarily or be equal with them, but submit to him. So it was very perverted in that way. It was a complete like hijacking of the marital role. And the whole picture of the church is really in marriage, but he was making it like he's the one that you're submitting to, while telling you don't need to submit, But it was a very confusing, oh my gosh, confusing time, a lot to sort through. Like seriously, coming out of this, I've just been like, Lord, you have to help me parse through these things, because for me coming into this, and I guess I could share a little bit about how I even got into this church. It was very much, at first I was just like living my life, I was like building my business online, and I'm like working it. I'm ambitious. I've got goals. I'm living my life, and I love Jesus, but like I've got my own plan and I'm doing this. And it's like God like just took me and like moved me over here, and now I'm like walking this way. Like, okay, like I'm not doing that. And like he literally took my desire away from me. Like, God gives us the desires of our heart. And it's like he took that away from me. And I'm just like, why am I not wanting to work my business anymore? And so like this was the beginning of him really like getting a hold of my heart. But it was a long journey from there. But and anyway, so around that time is when and this is kind of part of my story that I feel like is just, it's not black and white. It's not yes or no. It's like, I don't really know. God is like not inside a box, right? And so during this time when God put me on this track, I start like researching things, and because I'm like very much a researcher, and I'm very like want to understand things. If I start learning about something, I will peel it open like and keep going and until I understand it as thoroughly as I can. And so I started doing that with like, I don't know, weird stuff. Like I started learning about secret societies and like all this like weird things, conspiracies and things like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's so many lies or things that I was totally unaware of as a Christian. And it was very like convicting for me, because I realized Satan was real. So this is the whole thing with like the deliverance ministry. It's like, okay, that was like really bad. Like there were bad things that happened there, but there was like a lot that happened in my life before I even got there. And it was like God showing me, like, we know it's undeniable. There is a spiritual battle happening. Okay. So like, what do we do with that? And it's like, God wanted me to learn about like, okay, this is, but because he is over all of that, it's like, but I don't know. I was learning about all this stuff. What do I do with this? And during that time, I wasn't working anymore. I was a group leader at this Bible study called BSF. It's called Bible Study Fellowship. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before.
No.
It's a big like international thing. They're pretty solid. I think now looking back at everything, I'm like, okay, that was actually pretty good. But I was a group leader. So the way their structure is you have a small group, and you discuss the Bible study, and then everybody goes to a big lecture and they hear a lecture from a woman who's going to teach on the subject. And the year was ending and I was not going to come back to that study. And the leaders came to me and said, hey, we have prayed and we want you to be a substitute teaching, the lecturer, a substitute lecturer. And I was like, whoa, I didn't really think I was a very good group leader. Like, and you want me to like be this? Like, oh my gosh. So this was the first time in my life. This is the reason I'm praying. I'm sharing this is because this was the first time in my life that I really like submitted to the Lord and was like, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? Because being a lecturer sounds like a challenge that the old me would be like, yeah, I'm going to do that, And so anyway, I basically prayed and I got a clear no. And these people were like, okay, that's great. You prayed. And so another reason I bring this up is they responded so great to me saying, you know what, I prayed and I'm not going along with your, like what you think that I should say. And they handled it really well. And that contrasts so greatly with like this church that we were in. It's like, if you go against anything that they say, something's wrong with you. Like they want you so badly to be led of the Holy Spirit. And they really teach. It's like the teachings that they were giving at my church some of them were very, very good teachings. And if you actually listened to them and applied them, you would basically be taught out of their own church, because at some point you're going to butt heads with them. So it's kind of like this weird thing where I'm like, how do you reconcile the fact that you want us to use critical thinking and you want us to use seek the Lord on our own and all these things, but then, and you want us to be who God created us to be. Like we would literally be like yelled at from the podium, like, you're not living the life God wanted you to live. You're not being who God like just all this, like, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what am I not doing? And so, but if you actually took that and were like, okay, Lord, who do you want me to be? Like it could have a good outcome, but then eventually you're going to be led out of that church because God's going to lead you out because you're going to be led of him. So, anyway, eventually something happened in my home where a family member did something, and it was very much like we could not explain what happened, what this person just did. It was like it was an outburst. It was what I would still call today like a demonic manifestation. Like, and this is the thing where I'm like, I don't know, some people think Christians can't have demons. Some people think they can. Obviously, deliverance people think they can. How about I just say, you know what, I'm open to it. Like, I don't know, like, I'm not going to say no. And I'm not going to say yes. Absolutely. Like, I'm just like, okay, if something happens that I can't explain, I'm open to this possibility. But at that point, when it happened, I had no context for what it was that we just witnessed, what we just experienced. And so, of course, I go and I start researching. I don't even know what I looked up, but I'm like trying to figure out what in the world this was, what happened. And I found these two moms on YouTube, and they were interviewing this pastor, and they were talking about demons. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I think this is what that was. And I felt like, oh, this is the answer. And that was the pastor that we ended up joining his church.
There's so much to unpack there. So if you've read Dr. Stephen Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, one of the things that he talks about is the way in which a cult will get people involved, because if they can get them involved and then overextend their time and their energy, well, their guard goes down, their critical thinking goes down. And that's just one aspect of the critical thinking going down. The other thing that you were talking about is, interestingly, it all ties together. The secret societies, when people leave these types of groups, especially the Deliverance ministry, you are looking for a demon everywhere. I'm not making this up. If you've never been in this, you are literally looking for a demon if somebody's stealing your parking spot. If somebody gets a parking spot before you, that demon was out to get you. That's the world that this is. I have witnessed this. I've been in the car like this. There are people who are looking for demons when they don't exist. Now, I'm going to separate that from the biblical version of a demon. I'm talking about, I'm walking through my room and I stump my toe. Well, that demon got me. It got my toe. That's how ridiculous it gets. Well, when you leave something like this and you're in that mindset, then you suddenly begin to wonder, wait a minute, that was a cult I was in. This was purely evil. What if the devil was trying to get us through that? And you start looking into secret societies because you start to think, well, wait a minute, what if it's not just the minister? What if it's bigger than this? What if it's big? And I have talked to so many people in the support groups that the first place they head, interestingly, is not towards the Bible to reread and understand what it says. They'll go to the Masons, they'll go to the secret societies, Freemasonry, all of this stuff, and try to understand it so that they can somehow link what they came from to the secret societies. Mm-hmm. And I don't dissuade it. You know, people ask me questions about it, and I just say, well, you can't prove any of it, so you're welcome to go look, but they don't really let you access the records. However, it is a mindset that I think can be, with anything, if you can let your mind sort of spin out of control in that direction, it can be very unhealthy, and it'll lead people to places they don't want to go. So that's one aspect of things that you have going on. But the other thing that you mentioned, which is also just as important, which also I don't know that I've talked about in the podcast, the yelling at people from the pulpit. So they get you to come into the building, they get your guard down, they want you to turn off critical thinking. Sometimes the atmosphere of the church service itself is designed to get your guards down. So you really don't critically think in these types of environments. Well, during the course of the sermon, the minister starts yelling at you and forcibly, just verbally attacking this, that, and the other. Well, mentally, what happens when you're in that type of environment, your mind goes back to the place that you were when a child, when your parents were upset. So you really shut off critical thinking. You become more and more submission. And what it does eventually is, if they can get you to that level where they're beating you down like a stepchild that's being verbally abused, well, they can take full control of your mind. And that's, whether they know they're doing it willingly or whether they've learned this by design, I don't know. But this is a horrific thing that they're doing to the people. That is
Totally what we had going on at our church. Absolutely. Yes. And, it was very familiar to me, actually, because just, part of my story is, I grew up in an alcoholic home and dysfunction, and, these things were that, so like my nervous system was very like, oh, I know how to handle this, like shut down, and just disengage and do whatever you can to at least it's not being directed at you. Cause sometimes it was like, well, we'd be being yelled at, but they'd be yelling at us about like someone else and what they did. But we'd be like getting all the wrath. Like that person was gone. They're not even at the church anymore. Like, you know, but we're receiving all the, you know, wrath from whatever they did, you know? And so that again, you're right. Totally like shuts you down. It is a form of mind control. That is absolutely what they were doing. And the thing is though, they would preach on mind control and like, you know, to teach about it. And then there's like this huge blind spot that like, this is what's happening in our church, you know? But that's how effective it is, really.
Yeah.
So another little just piece of like my journey coming into this church was, as you know, I'm just learning things. I'm reading, I'm like devouring my Bible. Which I hadn't really done a lot of like previously in my Christian walk. But I'm also doing all this research. And one of the things that God did was he brought some people into my life who I became friends with, and I thought they were Christian. And I was like, oh yeah, these Christian people. And like, but there was something like a little off about them, but they would say some of the same words. But I just was like, what is this? It's just a little different, you know? And so of course I'm like, Lord, what is that? And I just start researching because I'm like, what do they believe? Because I've always also been fascinated with like cults and like different religions and things like that, just to learn about it. But so maybe God was just trying to give me a good lesson on what cults really are like. That's fine. No, but so basically I found out like, oh, these people are new age, like, okay. And new age isn't really new, it's old, and like all this stuff and like the origins of it and all the Gnosticism and the divine feminine and like just all these things, right? Christ consciousness and all these things. And I was like, oh my gosh, these people are not Christian. That was mind blowing to me to find out that there's like this side of like, you know, basically Satan's kingdom that is, it looks good because it looks good. It's the light, it's the false light, you know? But anyway, so I had this kind of base knowledge, which the NAR is part of this whole new age system, really. I mean, it's really new age with a Christian stamp on it, which I had kind of learned about the NAR before, but I didn't go that deep with it. I was like, okay, they're doing things that I disagree with, you know, they're slaying in the spirit. They're having manifestations that they could call it a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. And to me, that's how a demon would manifest, you know? So there were some things, and our church, the church that we were at, would also say these things. Okay. But your video on one of the videos that you did with somebody on Derek Prince, where you talked about how these fractures of these churches, they all say each other does things wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where I was like, oh my gosh. So even though the church that I went to was really small, very insignificant compared to like some of the churches that you've, you know, talked about on here, they still claim like, I don't know, not descendancy maybe, but like they claim kind of Derek Prince as like first generation Deliverance. And then it's like my pastor after that, you know, but so like in the 60s, there were these men is what they'd say, like Lester Summerall, Frank Hammond, Derek Prince, Win Worley, that they had that God put this call out, you know, basically who's going to take up deliverance, you know, for my people. And anyway, and Win Worley was my pastor's pastor. And so that's kind of how these connections, but Derek Prince is in there somewhere. Like they always said that Derek Prince was like religious. Yeah. You know, whatever that means for them, coming from them.
You know, it's odd. I get accused. In fact, I just heard this the other day. I get accused because all of these characters, they're working, maybe not working directly together, but they're building on each other's theology. I think that's the better way to put it. And so there's this weird cross-pollination that happens among a bunch of men and women who are literally competitors. And that's why they want to denounce the other guy. They want to become bigger than the other guy. And so in many cases, what happens is they're cross-pollinating. They hear of the other doctrines. Well, they start using it. And so you can't really tell the origins of where the doctrines came from. Derek Prince is one of these guys. Everybody says he was the greatest thing since sliced bread to some of the people, and you can see it in the comments. But he's networking with a bunch of people who are already doing exactly what he's doing. In fact, William Branham, if you heard the same podcast, William Branham and Gordon Lindsay were setting up schools to help train this deliverance thing. So they were literally training the masses to do exactly what he was doing. Well, he's the one who rose up and become big enough to become more famous than the others, I guess. But they're all doing the same thing. And then what happens is, because of the New Age ideas that are being disseminated among the group through various means, William Branham went to spiritualist camps, and he's learning weird things in the spiritualist camps. Latter Rain actually began with this idea that you could basically focus your mind and you could cause things to move in the room. And I've seen testimonies where William Branham came and taught others to move things with their minds. Now, whether you believe this actually happened or not, I don't know. I discount the whole thing, but there's this group of people that are trying it, I think is the way to say it. So metaphysics is not a Christian thing. This is not something that you read about in the Bible, but the men are doing it. And then that because of the cross-pollination of doctrines, that builds into other doctrines based off of the metaphysics. So where you end up is you can have this guy over here in this part of the country who's never heard of this guy over here in the other part of the country, both teaching the same thing because that apostolic network was basically teaching them through the cross-pollination of ideas. And that's the power of the NAR. You've got all of these people who have very similar frameworks of theology that is so anti-biblical that it doesn't even look like Christianity, but they're all networked, and the networks are supporting them and lifting them up where they sound to the unknowing people as though they're Christian. And the only way to get rid of this is for the unknowing people to start reading their Bibles and see that, that's not the God of the Bible.
Yeah, and to your point, people who, they love Derek Prince and they love, some of these people. And, it's like the best counterfeit has some good in it. The best counterfeit is going to have some truth. And so yes, of course, just like the church that I just left, there were good things there. There were good teachings. I did receive deliverance. I know I got deliverance. My life has changed, since coming into there and then leaving. And there were good things, but that doesn't mean it's all good. Like you're going to eat the whole sandwich. It's like the truth on the bread is truth. And then it's like a lie in here and you're eating all of it. And so, I don't know. It's like I've just come to this place where I started seeing that they don't really believe what they themselves preach. They really would preach on the sovereignty of God and, and then I saw in practice that they didn't really believe that, because in my mind, if we believe God is sovereign, and then they would always say, oh, well, God meters out your deliverance. Like God's in control of your deliverance. Right. But then they'd get if someone left the church, then, oh my gosh, they are now outside God's will. They've somehow they've managed to get themselves outside God's will. They've fallen, they're shipwrecked. Somehow this has happened. And, because they're not tied to the helm of deliverance for the rest of their life, where I'm reflecting on all this and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Okay. If God's in control of our deliverance, if he's sovereign, Jesus, it is the burden of the Lord to set his people free so that they can serve him, that is a thing. Then why don't we just be happy that we were able to minister to these people while they were here and then let them go and bless them on their way? Why does it have to be a thing that when they leave, it's now we hear messages for the next 2 years on all the mistakes that they made and how horrible they were. And, oh, by the way, they're probably witches, and, you know, they were tares. They were never of us because they've gone out from us. So they were never, you know, and it's like, why do we have to speak of them that way? If God is sovereign over all of this, I mean, you know, God is going to have his will done in your life. And there is not a demon in the whole Satan's kingdom that is going to keep him from being able to do that. So whether you're in a deliverance church or not, getting actual deliverance, God will make sure that you are to the point where you can carry out what he has purposed for you in your life, you know? And so that's one of the things that can give us peace as Christians, that God is in control, and that he, you know, like, so all of these things just started to like, kind of, it was like the cognitive dissonance in my mind. And I just kept seeing it. It was just like, oh my gosh, like I can't, why do they say these things? Why, you know, and then my heart started being broken for the people that had left and the things that were said about them that I believed, that were just so awful and terrible and like not true, you know, and I just had to repent. And like, that's the work of the Holy Spirit. He was just gently like, hey, this was not right, you know? And it's like, oh my gosh. Right. But something had to crack through that mind control for me. And what that was at a workshop in September of 2024. There was a prophecy given by our church's prophet, who is the pastor's wife. And that prophecy just, I was like, something like it kicked something off in me. Okay. So this was like 5 years after I had like done all this research on my own, right? I had joined the church and I was on my deliverance journey, and I kind of put that stuff aside because I'm just trying to focus on my heart and myself and with the Lord. But something happened with this prophecy, and I was like, something's not right. And I didn't know what it was, but I started researching the NAR again. I was like, why am I researching the NAR? I don't know why, but I was just like going all in on it and learning. I learned about the manifest sons of God and the sacred purge and like all the new age, just like Alice Bailey, Jane Lead, all these connections, even going back to the Jesuits, where they like wanted the charismatic movement to start. Anyway, just I was finding out all of this stuff, and I don't know why I'm researching this, because I'm like, okay, I feel like this has something to do with this prophecy. And so I'm sending my pastor like, hey, I found all this stuff out. Like, this is crazy, right? Like, there's a group of people out there, and they're like actually a pretty big group of people now. Like, they're in churches, have their doctrine, they don't even realize it, you know, and like all this stuff. And he basically said, I'm too black and white. All of my mind, my brain isn't working. Like, I need deliverance. My demons are preventing me from being able to think. And my alcoholic patterns are just, those demons are just really showing right now. And I just need to just get deliverance, sit down and stop researching this stuff. And so time goes on, and I found out that the source of this prophecy that she gave was actually a NAR prophet. Wow. Mario Murillo. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I found online his prophecy, like he had given this prophecy, and her prophecy that she gave to us was verbatim what he had said. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, this is why I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is why I'm researching the NAR. Like, I'm not being like too black and white or whatever my pastor is saying. Like, I was being led of the Spirit to research something that was extremely relevant to what was happening in our church, right? And so I send this to my pastor. I was like, hey, oh my gosh, like, here's the link. This was your wife's message. Here it is right here. And this guy is a NAR guy. And I'm like, are you like, do you see what's happening?
Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the new Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support. So I want to talk so badly about the copying and plagiarizing of prophecies because that's a common thing that happens. However, you've brought up point number 3 that I've never talked about. I'm surprised that I have not. You brought up the term witch. When you were talking about how they were labeling other people. This is not unique to these cults. This goes far beyond these cults. But if you study the deliverance ministries, how they function and how they operate, and you are actually familiar with history and you understand what happened at the Salem Witch Trials, the two are exactly the same. There were people, mostly women, who were getting into anxiety attacks or states of euphoria where they were eventually coming down with fits and outbursts and convulsions and whatnot. Well, the understanding of mental health back then was very, very low. So they started saying, well, these people have demons. We need to cast out the demons from these ladies. And one of them had not been attending church. Well, she's an outsider. She's outside of God's will. I mean, that's the phrase I'm laughing because it was commonly used in the Branham circles, but it appears to have been far beyond this. So you have people who are literally claiming that they can see a demon in a person, and they're calling it a witch. They're, different forms of witchcraft, etc. And what happened was it became the term witch hunt. They started going through from person to person trying to see if they could detect these demons, much like the deliverance people. So if you go to a deliverance service and you come with any sort of sickness, well, that's a demon. If you come with, I said it before, if you come with the hiccups, that's a demon. It's unbelievable. And so they're doing this in the Salem Witch Trials, and they realize that their power to cast out the demons is not good enough. We need to burn the devil out of them. And so eventually it turned into, I think there were something like, if I remember correctly, it was like 200 people were accused of having this possession, this evil possession. I think it was maybe in the 20s were executed, but obviously they were not witches. and I'll get feedback for that, so I'll qualify that statement. Most of the people who were either executed or accused were regular church members that were attending churches who were Christians who were being accused. But they had a mental health, like it turned into this mental health crisis because people were breaking out in convulsions, etc. There's a lot of anxiety, and anxiety was probably fueling a lot of it. So if you compare what happened historically there, now compare it to what's happening in deliverance ministries now, they're going and pointing fingers at people saying you have this demon possession. You, sister, have the hiccups. That's a devil. It's going to get out of you. And I mentioned those wedges that are drawn between the two people. Well, if you're married to a spouse that has a demon, oh my gosh, I don't want to be married to a spouse that has a demon. So people start thinking in ways that they should never be thinking, and it turns into a witch hunt. So historically, it's basically history repeating itself into this thing. Now, combine that with what you just said about the power of the NAR all of these networks, they're all doing the same thing. Well, news begins to spread through these networks. Oh my gosh, this church, they have several demons. Let's call our most famous demon hunter the Deliverance minister, and they bring him in. I have no doubt that's how Derek Prince got his fame. He started being the one that they were asking to come cast the demons out of the churches. And it turns into the Salem Witch Trials, but on a much, much more national scale. And that's what's happening here.
Yeah, totally. And it's really sad too, because I know, like, if any of the members of the church I was just at, if they were to see this video and see me having a conversation like this, I just know they would say, "Oh, Audrey, the veil has just come back over her eyes. She is just for questioning things and just not blindly, like, okay, can we just talk about this stuff? You know, like when you're in there, you can't really question it, because like questions are allowed to a certain extent, but there's like a line that you can cross, and it mainly has to do with if there are any problems with the way things are being taught or the type of thing being taught. Like if you can prove that, hey, is that really what the Bible says? You know, then you're just being religious. Oh, your lawyer spirits are really, you know, you got to get deliverance, and they don't actually address what you're bringing up. You know, they just gaslight you. They're just like gaslight you, and then you don't even know and then like it was confusing for me when it was happening to me, because that's what my pastor did to me, when I even said, here is her message right here, this is the NAR message that she gave, and he just was like, he said, "Audrey, we are not in the NAR." And I was like, I know. I mean, I thought, I was like, yeah, you're not getting what I'm saying. I'm at this point, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're listening to people and being influenced by people who are in the NAR. Now that I'm out and I've had more time to think about it, I'm like, they're like in it. Like they're more so in it. But anyway, he went back to, I really just think it's your black and white thinking, Audrey. You really got to work on that, you know, and it's just, and doesn't address. I'm like, yeah, but what about this prophecy? Like, if I had known this was her source, I would have run for the hills and not even given it another thought. Like, we are to mark these people and avoid them, and, you know, like these false prophets. And so it's like, it's not like they're not just fellow sheep with like some bad doctrine. Like, they're wolves in sheep's clothing. Like it's not just like they're our brothers and sisters and they're just a little deceived, you know? It's more than-
when I was talking about the witch trials, I think I even said it incorrectly, because it's so commonly said that the women were burned at the stake. That's actually not what happened in Salem. That did happen, I think, in Europe, but in the United States, I don't think there was a single burning, if I remember correctly. What happened was there were a few that were executed. There were some who died who were kept captive, and they were just kept separate from the other people. I think maybe in a jail or something like this. They were branded, essentially. And there were people who were treated so poorly that they died while imprisoned. Well, if you consider the way that the cult treats the people who question, the people who, you know, if you engage any critical thinking at all, well, that's a demon. That's spiritual possession. And so what they do is they label people and they brand them just like they do in the witch trials. And so you become, even mentally, you become isolated from the other people. You're like, oh my gosh, do I really have a demon? And the other people who aren't aware, they're like, well, he says that this person has a demon. I need to stay clear of this person. And so it causes this separation it's even worse than an Amish shunning. In an Amish shunning, there is no, I guess there are some cases where there are, but I have seen some cases where the Amish are shunning people and it's just because they want to go live out in the world. They don't associate this with a demon possession. They just associate this with rebellion. And so the person is still human. In these deliverance ministries, the person is actually dehumanized in the same way that they were in the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah. Because you can, like, he can always say to me, oh, it's your alcoholic patterns, you know? And I'm like, well, how much deliverance do I need before I can actually use my brain? You know, Cause like, like, are you in charge of that? Like, how do I know? You know? I don't know. Yeah, it was a lot too. But that false prophecy, that prophecy that led me down that trail for that connected with the NAR, and then I found out all this other stuff about the NAR, was what cracked through the mind control for me. And that's when I started, like, I just like pulled back a little emotionally so I could just see, like, okay, I'm still gonna, so I'm a distance member. I was a distance member. So like the church is in Colorado. I live in Kansas. So we would just tune in. So that was a benefit to me because I wasn't there. I mean, even though I wasn't there though, oh my gosh, the control was still like insane. But at least I wasn't seeing in person, you know, but I would go out to these workshops like a couple times a year. Yeah. So, but anyway, I started just pulling back. I would still tune in and we'd still watch church and pray and like do all these things that like we normally did. But it was just always there. And then I started to see other things, you know, I was like, wait, you know, like he told a story that he's told a million times, and it's a story that every time he tells it brings tears to his eyes, you know? And I was just like, those are fake tears. Like, that's not real, you know? And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I just started, like, it was just a little by little after that. And then I started to think more about how we treated people when they left. Like, that was kind of what came next. And then I reached out to some people who had left because I was like, I'm not afraid to talk to these people. Like, I've just been told not to talk to them and to cut them, like, not just to not talk to them, completely cut them out of your life, like block them, like burn, get rid of anything that they gave you, like just cut them out and don't ever talk to them. And so I started contacting those people. And I was like, hey, what happened? You know, what happened when you left? And because we were told you were a witch, you know, and I repented to them too, asked for forgiveness because I believed these things, you know, even though I knew these people when they were at our church, like I knew them and I loved them, you know. So that was really heartbreaking for me to see, like, how far you'll go, like, but you never would have behaved that way. But thank God he pulled me out of it, and he, you know, my heart was not hardened. He could still get to me and prick me with that conviction, you know. So I'm just really thankful for that.
So you've brought up yet another thing that I've never talked about. This is a podcast of firsts. For anybody who was never in this thing, we have a lot of viewers and listeners who are just curious, what is this mess? What is this weird thing, the NAR? And so they have no clue that this is actually a thing. But there are people who are programmed, manipulated, and fully controlled from remote. I was in remote churches. I was in churches where the church was actually miles and miles and miles away. And sometimes we would have an audio feed only. Sometimes we would travel to it, but remote controlled. I mean, literally remote controlled. And much like you, and interestingly, one of the places that I lived was in Kansas, very close to Joplin, Missouri. And the church we went to was way off in the Ozarks. It was like an hour and a half drive. So this was pretty remote for us. But much like you, I noticed the fakeness of it because, and I have told this story before, I went to some sort of a revival thing down in Georgia, and they had just rebuilt the church, and my kids were a little bit unruly. The interesting part about unruliness in these Pentecostal type circles, your kids get severely beaten because they strongly want you to spare the rod and spoil the child. I refused to do this. And so instead, I took my kid who had sat through this long, long sermon. He couldn't sit anymore. Took my son downstairs. Well, they had this was unusual, but they had a men's room for taking your children down that was comfortable. They had a recliner, and they had a big screen TV where I could watch the sermon. So I was up in the audience with all of this euphoria that you get in these screaming, and your brain is in. It's almost like you're in a football game. That's kind of the excitement that it brings you. Well, then I leave this euphoria and I go and I watch it on TV, and I've got the volume a little bit low so I can talk to my son. Well, then I'm looking at it and I'm like, this looks so fake. These guys are faking it. And that was the first time it had ever hit me, when I'm watching it on TV instead of actually being in the audience, feeling what the audience is feeling.
Yeah. That is, once you see it and you just have that little bit of separation, that's when you're really engaging your mind. You're engaging your mind, and you're thinking critically and objectively and for yourself. Yeah. And there, like I said, there's experiences that I had in that church that I really can't explain. I've been through some deliverance sessions where I know a demon was cast out of me. I guess I'm open to the idea that it wasn't. I don't know. Something happened and I changed. I'm different. But it's not just the deliverance. It's also the truth being poured in through God's word and learning more about who he is and his love for me. And because, growing up in the home that I did, and I love my family dearly. But it was what it was, and I had a lot of really bad, wrong belief systems that were really bad, and they did not line up with God's word. And in that aspect, our church that we were at, they gave messages that were very focused on addressing your heart and addressing your belief systems. So that's why I say too, and then comparing them with the word of God. So that's where we really got a lot of actual, I think it was pretty good meat. Now there was a lot of junk in there too. I know there was, but that's why I say too, that they would preach. If you really did what they said, you would be preached out of their church. If the reins of control were broken off of you and their tactics of control and manipulation no longer affected you. And that's the key, because you're not if they're still affecting you, then you could be getting all these great messages and hearing truth. That's really truth, but you're still bound by their control, and they're these puppet masters in your life. There was a girl who, she did something and ended up being maybe something she regretted. And the pastor was well, she should have asked her pastor if that was a good idea, and it's so you want us to just come to you and ask, literally ask you for everything. But at the same time, you want us to be led of the Holy Spirit, and you want us to seek the Lord for everything. So it's it was just this, what is the word? Duplicitous, kind of, or a paradox or something. I don't know if that's the right word either. But it was confusing. It's confusion, because you're well, you're saying to do this, but you actually are expecting us to do this, and it conflicts. So then after the false prophecy, I didn't know what to do, because I was really broken because of the way he was treating me, and I was it really wrecked me. This was the first time that I had been treated this way, really. He had been really a positive thing in my life up until this point, I thought, and I was sobbing and I was crying out to the Lord, and I was just Lord, heal me. This is really hurting, and for the first time ever in my life, I heard, it's okay. You're going to be okay. And I had this part of me that was mature and could comfort myself in the midst of heartbreak, which I hadn't in my life really had that before. And that was just really fruit for me, fruit of growth in the Lord and maturing. But meanwhile, my pastor was telling me that I have an arrested conscience, and I'm arrested. I'm like a baby. I'm like a babe in Christ, because I'm pursuing this and researching this and keep bringing this to him, and I won't let it go. I'm my conscience is arrested. And I'm like, well, I'm experiencing the opposite of that. I'm experiencing a mature mind, you know, a developed conscience, you know? And so it's just really, and I was like, Lord, you're going to have to judge between us because I feel like powerless right now. And at this point, I had the thought in my mind. I was like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like I leave the church. Like that's the worst thing that could happen. And that's the first time I ever would have, I mean, I've never had that thought before. Like, no, I would never leave this church, never, you know? And then it just kind of plopped out of my mouth when I was talking to my husband, and I was like, not really bothered by it. Like when it came out, which it kind of stopped me, and it was like, yeah, I mean, that's the worst that could happen. And I think that'd be okay.
There's this interesting vicious cycle that happens when you're in these movements that if you're not in this and you've never been in it, you don't understand it. But the ministers put you through such mental anguish that you become mentally distressed. And the interesting part of this is, so the Bible mentions demons and the Bible talks about demon possession, etc. There are people who believe that any sort of mental health issue is also a demon, because the way that the authors of the Bible, the way that they understood mental health issues was, we don't understand this, this is a demon. So there's this whole group of Christians that believe that mental anguish, mental health issues is demonic. And especially in these groups, they believe this. But yet at the same time, the ministers are putting people into that position. So if you really think about what they believe and what they're doing, they're causing the demons that they're delivering people from. Well, what happens over time, and this is something that it's difficult really to explain to people if you've never been in it. But what happens over time, you become so oppressed and mentally distressed that you start to feel deliverance in different areas, because they're pushing you down to such a level that they'll lift you up in one other area. And so suddenly you feel this thing, and what you're feeling is this release. You're feeling this release in your head that's happening, that some, you know, out of all the mental distress you have, now I've got one area that's free, one area is better. And you start to look at the deliverance minister as though he's some magician. He's cured you of this demon. But in fact, he's usually the one that caused it or put it there, he or she, if you're in this type of movement. But it is a horrific thing to go through, and people don't understand how bad this is. And again, they're causing the very thing that they say they're casting out in many cases. So in fact, this would make them a devil. This would make them the witch or the warlock, right? If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice while you're in this, and some encouragement that you would finally one day leave, what advice would you give yourself?
Cling to Jesus. Cling to Jesus. That's all I can say. I mean, it's only God who can get anyone out, really. I mean, yeah, cling to Jesus, and don't let any person come between you and the Lord. Because I really feel like I felt like I was following my pastor, following Christ, right? That's how it was in my mind. But I always maintained connection with the Lord, and made sure I took my own ownership of my own faith with God himself, and didn't just, you know, listen to the pastor on everything.
Well, it's very good advice. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, if you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion: From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.